Hello everyone, my name is Yasser Saeed and this is the course of International Trade Theory, Econ 446. We are here with lecture number 12 and we will study the standard trade model, which is our next or newer chapter in the series of International Trade Theory. Now, in this lecture, we are going to study how to measure the values of production and how to measure the value of consumption. Then we are going to study the welfare and terms of trade. Then the effect of these things on the economic growth. And then we will be studying the effect of international transfers of income. And finally, we are going to study the effects of imports tariff and exports subsidies in this scenario in the standard trade model. The basic idea of specific factor model is that it combines the elements from the standard from the Ricardian model, and it combines other elements from the Heckscher-Ohlin model. For example, in Ricardian model, we say that laborers in different countries have different productivity. For example, in one country, if labor is productive in the production of wheat, whereas in another country they are productive in wine, then a country that is productive in wheat will be producing more and more wheat, whereas the other country will be producing wine, and they can trade with each other. So, Ricardian model says that countries have comparative advantage based on their labor productivity. The Heckscher-Ohlin model goes a step further. It says that not only labor productivity but uh, productivity of other resources as well counts. And it also states that each country has a different set of resources and they are endowed to them by nature. For example, certain countries may have more oil resources, abundant oil resources, whereas other countries may have good agricultural land. Now, the country that has good agricultural land will be producing agricultural goods. For example, if you look at Pakistan, so Pakistan has agricultural land. It will be producing resources such as textile, which requires cotton, and cotton is grown on farms. So, being a producer of textile goods is because our labor is not much different from other countries' labor, but mostly because we have land resources that can produce cotton, and from that cotton we can produce threads, and from that thread we can produce cloth, and then we can export those clothes. On the other hand, if you look at capital rich countries like UK, US, and Japan that have abundant capital, so they can produce capital intensive goods like machinery, like electric goods. And we can also look at Arabian countries that have oil rich that are oil rich countries. So they will be producing goods that requires more oil based products, for example cosmetics, for example plastic. So productivity basically depends on the natural endowment, as well as if we are studying the standard trade model, it depends both on natural endowment as suggested by the Heckscher-Ohlin model, as well as the labor productivity as suggested by the Ricardian model. Now, the second point is that these productive differences are represented as differences in production possibility frontier. Because of these differences, what happens is that each and every country have a different production possibility frontier for a certain set of goods. For example, if you are producing two goods like clothes and food, then each country will be different in the production. Each country will have different production capability for these goods because of the point number one, that is the difference in the resources. Then these production possibility frontier in turn determine the overall supply of goods by that country. For example, Pakistan being an agricultural country will be producing more, will supply more of agriculture items and less of capital intensive items such as machinery, whereas the other countries like Japan that will produce less of agriculture items and more of uh, electronics and manufactured goods. Then again, the fourth point tells us that the national relative supply, the supply of each country determines the world supply for those goods, whereas the national demand, the country-specific demand, that determines when add up to other countries' demand, the international demand for that good. So the international supply and demand is actually a combination of the individual countries' supply and demand. What determines the value of production? Basically, we determine the value of production from the production possibility frontier. We have a number of points lying on the production possibility frontier, and we can produce all of those goods. But what we will produce those goods that gives us the maximum value. And to determine the value, basically, we need the prices of both the goods. So if we are producing cloth and we are producing food, we can produce the combination of both of these goods. But all those combinations do not give us the maximum value. Only a single combination out of the entire production possibility will give us the maximum value. And how we can determine the value of the production possibility frontier? The formula is given here, that is V is equal to PC into QC plus PF into QF. So PC is the price of cloth and QC is the quantity of cloth. If you are producing 10 units of cloth and each unit of cloth has 10 rupees, then the total value of cloth that we have produced is 10 multiplied by 10, and that is 100. And if the price of food is 10 as well, and the quantity of food that we are producing is 10, then again multiply these two and we will get 100. Adding the two, we will get a total worth of 200. So we are producing quantity worth of 200 rupees. Now this describe the this is how we determine the value of production, and we can compare this ISO value line if you want to keep the value constant, then we will call this ISO value line. And for ISO value line, then any changes in PF and PC are not possible. That will change the slope of the ISO value line. If we increase PC as compared to PF, then the slope of ISO value line will change. But if we increase any of the quantities, that is, if we want to increase QC, what will happen? We will have to reduce QF to keep the value same. For example, earlier we had these prices of cloth and food equal to 10. So if we increase 1 unit of cloth, then we'll producing 110 rupees worth of good. That is, QC will be 11 and PC will be 10. So we are producing 110 worth of cloth. But about food, if we still produce the same amount of food, then what will happen? PF is 10 and QF is 100. Multiply, sorry, is 10 as well, and multiplying these two, we will get 100. The total value now will be 110 plus 100 is equal to 210. So the value does not remain constant. In order to increase QC, we will producing 110 worth of cloth, then we should produce less of food. We should produce 9 units of food, and 9 into 10 will give us 90. The total worth of this production will be 90 plus 110, and that equals to a total of 200. So the value remains constant. So keep it in mind. If we want to keep the value constant, or we want to call it iso value line, PC by PF will change the slope, whereas if we increase QC, we will decrease the quantity of food. Then the slope of the iso value line equals to minus PC by PF. This is what we have already demonstrated in the Heckscher-Ohlin model, how to derive the slope of the iso value line. Basically, we find the value of QC in terms of QF, and the slope that we will get is equal to minus PC over PF, and this is the relative price change, or the slope of this iso value line. So here you can see the production possibility frontier, the red curve, that is our production possibility frontier, and we can produce anywhere on this frontier, but we cannot consume, that will not have the maximum value. For example, let me take up the pen over here. Let me identify this point to you. We can produce at this point, let's call it point A. We can produce at point A and that production will be efficient because it uses our entire resources, but the value at point A will be less than the value at point Q. Point Q has more value. Why? Because it lies on the higher iso value line. Similarly, let me identify another point, and we call it point B. Now point B is also possible, and it is also an efficient production, but still it doesn't give us the maximum value. Why? Because the value of point B and point A is same. It may be giving us a worth of 190, but at Q we are getting the worth of these products equal to 100, or equal to 200. So 200 is greater than 190. Similarly, there is another iso value line, and we can point another variable. Let us call that point C. So point C has even better value than point Q, but we are not going to produce point C because the value of point C is greater than point Q, but we do not have enough resources to produce that quantity. That is outside our production possibility frontier. That is outside our production capability. So the only point that we can produce and has maximum value is at point Q. All other points will have lesser value. Let me also identify another point, that is, let's say if you want to produce at point D. Now what is the problem with point D? First of all, its value is less than point A, B and point Q. From all of the points, if you compare with them, its value is less. Another problem with point D is that it does not use the resources efficiently as well. It is below the production possibility frontier, and it does not use all the resources efficiently. So we should not produce point D at any cost. We are not using our labor entirely. We are not using our capital resources for this purpose. So the only better point that we can see for production purpose is point Q. Then let us talk about the changes in prices. We discussed here now that when we increase the price of cloth as compared to price of food, what will happen? The slope of the iso value line will change, and when that happens, we have a different point. Now initially we had point Q1 where the value was maximum, but now the value is maximum at Q2, and that is also possible for us to produce If we move to Q1, Q1 will now have lesser value. Let me draw a parallel iso value line to the new line on the new prices. If you see, we will have a lesser value for Q1. Now Q2 has more value as compared to Q1. Why has this happened? This happens because of the change in price. Now, if the price of cloth has increased, the supply of cloth must increase as well. You see, initially we had the supply of cloth at C1, let's say we call it C1, but now we have more units of cloth produced in this economy, because this will enable the uh, the production value to increase. But on the other hand, since the relative price of food has decreased, we will be producing less food than earlier. F1 may identify the price of food in the first scenario, whereas F2 identifies the price of food in our new scenario. So by increasing the price of cloth as compared to the price of food, what happens? We produce more cloth as compared to food. The production of cloth has risen from C1 to C2, whereas the production of food has reduced from F1 to F2.